Hi, this is Bob Odell with Root Source, and we're back with Geoff Barnard.
Hi.
So, Geoff, we talked a little bit about Arad, where you live. We spoke a little bit about your faith journey. You became a Christian without knowing your Jewish heritage in 66. In 67, you heard about this thing happening, the Six-Day War has affected you. Tell us about when you first came to Israel, and how was that for you?
Well, time passes. In 1973, I took on my third job, which was also in the research department. This was at King's College Hospital in London. I had, in a sense, no intention to be a research scientist as such when I joined that department. I had to wait to be appointed because the person who was to become my professor, who I owe an awful lot to, I have to tell you, Professor Bill Collins, was actually not in the department. He was on sabbatical for 3 months with his family, and that was at the Weizmann Institute of Science, which is in Rehovot, nearer to the airport in Israel.
This is famous. This is
it's one of the top research centres in the world. There's no question about it. It's a very prestigious place. And I always remember the day when I'm with Bill and we're travelling home he was very close to where I was living in South London, and he said to me, "Oh, Geoff, would you like to go to Israel?" Israel was one place that I had already decided that I wanted to come to, so this was an exciting thing for him to say. But in brief, what Bill was doing was to give me the privilege to continue the relationship that he had established with the Weizmann Institute of Science. Now, as it happened, Bill saw in me the capability of being a research scientist. I'd got a degree, and now I was registered for a PhD.
Isn't it wonderful when somebody sees something in a younger person and can encourage them? And that's Lord bless that man.
I pray for Bill a lot. But and so in March 1978, I came for my first visit to Israel. This was for 3 weeks to do some work at the Weizmann Institute of Science.
And what year was this again?
1978.
Okay.
March 1978. Now, what did I know? I thought it would be my only time I would ever come to Israel. So I thought,
that's pretty common.
if I get the chance, and I knew that my primary reason for being there was to do some scientific work.
Yes.
I would try to see a little bit of the country.
Okay.
If I could. Well, to cut a long story short, on my last weekend, which was essentially the last day of March 1978, I stayed the night in a hostel. You could call it a Christian hostel. It was in Haifa. Well, I want to see something of the north, so I'll go to Haifa.
And you're staying there to try to save money, or was it just the experience that you were trying to, meeting people?
That's an interesting question, because this was a useful base for me to be at least to see something of the north of the country. Okay. But having said that, knowing that Israeli believers would travel into that hostel on a Friday night, mainly from the north, and they would stay overnight in the hostel, and they would have meetings, teaching meetings, worship, Friday night through Saturday, and then when the buses started at the end of Shabbat, people would go their own ways. Well, little did I know that my going there was effectively going to change the course of my life. I was 30 years old, relatively conservative, English academic, scientist, evangelical Christian. And there I met a 23-year-old Canadian kibbutznik. His name is Rick Wienecke. Now, I didn't know at the time, but Rick was to become a very accomplished sculptor. and maybe people can see photos of some of the work that Rick has done, but probably his life's work is the most amazing sculpture that is actually established over the road in his backyard, which is called the Fountain of Tears. There are lots of different ways of understanding it. It is a dialogue of suffering between Jesus, Yeshua, in his crucifixion, and the Jewish people, particularly as expressed within the Holocaust. It's a very dramatic piece of work. We think that something like 25,000 people have now been to see it. Well, of course, in 1978, I didn't know that. But Rick told me his story. It so inspired me that I determined that if I had another opportunity to come to Israel, and I didn't know that that would be true, I would find him, we would become friends. And we did become friends.
You now live in Israel. Did you make Aliyah?
Well, that's an interesting point. In 2005, Carol, my wife, and I... Well, Carol hadn't been to Israel for some years. I'd been coming very regularly. So we decided just to come for a week's holiday. Really to touch base with our good friends. And of course, Rick and Daphne are top of that list. And it just so happened that at the time that we were coming, Rick and Daphne, who had been living up north, actually on a settlement, but in 2005, when the Israeli government chose to disengage from Gaza,
right,
they also closed down 4 small settlements in the north, one of which was where Rick and Daphne had lived for 11 years. So Rick and Daphne had to find a new place to live.
Okay.
And the Lord brought them here to the edge of the desert.
To Arad.
To Arad.
Yeah.
And the real estate agent who found them their house said to Carol and I, there's a house for sale across the street. Would you be interested? Well, this was an interesting development, and we decided to have a look. Carol came. And
by that time, you knew you had Jewish heritage.
Oh, yes.
So you knew it would have been a possibility.
Yes, that's right. So as soon as we found the house, we began the process of making Aliyah. Now, we could do it. I am not perceived as Jewish by the state of Israel.
Even though you have a Jewish father.
I have a Jewish father.
Okay.
But the issue is this. For you to be perceived as Jewish by the state of Israel, and certainly by the rabbis, you have to have a Jewish mother. I didn't have a Jewish mother. I only had a Jewish father. But because, it's a very interesting thing, because of Hitler's Nuremberg laws in the 1930s, the state of Israel adopted something similar, because if you were half Jewish or quarter Jewish, according to Hitler, you were still sufficiently Jewish to go to Auschwitz, as an example. Therefore, the new state of Israel in the early 50s gave the opportunity for half Jewish people, if you like, or quarter Jewish people, that is, somebody who's only got one Jewish grandparent, to make Aliyah, to come on the basis of the law of return. And so because I had a Jewish father, even though I'm not perceived to be Jewish, we began the process of making Aliyah.
In 2000
Well, we began in 2006, I suppose, after we'd bought the house.
So the laws were still in place over the next... Okay.
Well, I believe they are still in place, although it's becoming increasingly difficult. It is true. The interesting thing for me was that although we weren't handing out evangelistic tracts, they knew very quickly that Carol and I were Christians.
Yeah.
Now that can be difficult. It can be difficult. One has to accept the reality of the situation. It's because of history. You know, the greatest enemy of the Jewish people has been the Christian church. It's a fact. We have to accept the fact.
And to our shame.
Of course, to our shame. And so it is actually difficult for Christians or Messianic Jews, perhaps even more so, to make Aliyah. You can be anything you like. You can be into witchcraft or paganism or be an atheist, or it's not so much of a problem as being a believer that Yeshua is the Messiah. Now, they knew that we were Christians. Carol and I got married in church. That was the first flag that went up. And of course, if you do Google me, you can see that I've been involved in various different Christian activities. It is true. The interesting thing for me, which is really interesting, the lovely lady that was our administrator in the Ministry of Interior wanted us to become citizens. But she was under pressure. She was under enormous pressure. The last thing that she asked me to provide by way of evidence was evidence that would indicate that my mother was not Jewish.
Now that's interesting. What do you know why?
I think I do know why. It's because if I don't have a Jewish mother, it doesn't matter what I believe. You know, you can believe in Yeshua, you can believe in Jesus, you can be a Christian. And if you don't have a Jewish mother, you're not perceived as being Jewish in any case. And I think the tradition is that children adopt the religion of their mother, you know. So when I was able to provide something, and I won't go into all the details, that was sufficient evidence for them that would indicate that my mother was not Jewish, you could see the tension and the pressure melt away from the administrator.
Oh,
she was no
she just
longer
assumed that you would have if you're, I'm Jewish. Well, then you must have a Jewish mother, right?
Yeah.
So, well, you know, it's interesting. I think that, you know, the Lord Hashem, you know, that what is meant to happen will happen. You know, with faith.
I mean, talking of
and
my
so
friend,
you're here.
Talking of my friend Rick, he's got the most amazing story. He's not Jewish at all. He doesn't have any Jewish ancestry, and yet the Lord wanted him here, and the Lord gave him initially permanent residency, and then because he chose to go through the army, he got citizenship. If the Lord wants you here, you will stay here.
Well, I'm sure that will be inspiring to people. And when we come back, I want to ask Geoff really about the core reason that I wanted to speak with him. I wanted to hear his view on the time of Jacob's trouble.
Right.
And so when we come back in the next segment, we'll go right there, and hope you stay with us. And until then, shalom.